Kyle tapped his screen nervously, scrolling through astro-matched profiles. The glowing text on his holo display promised, "Find your perfect match, anywhere in the galaxy." Perfect match? Kyle wasn't picky. After all, dating on Earth hadn't exactly been a slam dunk for him. A few awkward first dates, some ghosting, and that one horrifying incident with a Tinder bot that sent him into therapy for a month. This, he told himself, was his fresh start. The profiles were a lot. He swiped left on a sentient cloud whose bio read, "Looking for a breath of fresh air? I am air." Left again on a reptilian warrior whose claim to fame was, "Excellent tongue dexterity." Left, left, left. Most were either too alien to comprehend or too terrifying to imagine dating. He chuckled at one photo of a six-eyed amphibian posing seductively on what looked like a pile of bones. "Romance really is universal," he muttered. Just as he was about to call it quits, a profile lit up his screen. Jalindra. Her hollow projection was stunning, humanoid, sleek, with a warm smile that seemed genuinely inviting. Her bio read, "Fluid, adaptable, and seeking a connection that transcends boundaries." She sounded adventurous, like she could show him things he'd never imagined. He hesitated only a second before swiping right. Matched. The notification popped up, accompanied by a jaunty little tune. Kyle's heart raced as a message from Jalindra appeared. "Dinner? My treat. Bring an appetite." He typed back, "Sure. Where and when?" and sent it before he could overthink. Her response came instantly. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m., the Galactic Grub Hub. Can't wait to meet you." Kyle spent the next day oscillating between excitement and anxiety. What if she didn't like him? What if this was another elaborate scam, and he ended up donating his kidney to an alien prince? His friends weren't exactly helping. "You're dating an alien?" His roommate Max laughed. "What's the plan, bro? Show her your Earthman charm? Maybe she's into awkward silences and bad jokes." "Shut up, Max," Kyle snapped, though he couldn't help smirking. "At least I'm trying. What do you have going on? Another weekend with your VR girlfriend?" Max held up his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, don't knock it till you try it." By the time Kyle arrived at the Galactic Grub Hub, a trendy restaurant floating just outside Earth's orbit, he was sweating bullets. The place was bustling with all sorts of species, glowing, slimy, metallic, and everything in between. He adjusted his jacket, trying to look casual as he scanned the crowd for Jalindra. Her hollow projection had said she'd be wearing something red. His eyes caught a flash of crimson at the far end of the room. There she is. Relief flooded him. Her shape looked humanoid enough, though she was slightly taller than he'd expected. As he walked closer, however, her form shifted slightly, the edges blurring and glistening. Something was off. When she turned, Kyle's jaw nearly hit the floor. Jalindra wasn't humanoid at all. She was an 8-foot-tall gelatinous blob, her red dress merely a bioluminescent part of her body. Two glowing orbs floated where her eyes should have been, and tendrils sprouted from her sides, waving as if greeting him. "Kyle!" Her voice bubbled, literally, with a cheerful resonance. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you in person." He froze, staring at her in stunned silence. His brain scrambled for something, anything, to say. "Say hello, idiot." But all he managed was a strangled, hi." Her tendrils extended, one wrapping around his hand in what he assumed was her version of a handshake. It was warm, almost comforting, but also slightly sticky. He fought the urge to pull back. "You're even better than your profile picture," she said, her tone genuinely pleased. "Thanks," he croaked. You're different?" she offered, laughing. "I know, my projection wasn't entirely accurate. But I figured you'd appreciate the surprise. Isn't it more exciting to meet the real me?" "Exciting," he repeated weakly. "That's definitely the word." He wanted to run, but some strange sense of politeness, or maybe morbid curiosity, kept him rooted to the spot. Jalindra guided him to a table, her tendrils moving with surprising grace. "I hope you're hungry," she said. The food here is legendary. Kyle sat stiffly as the waiter, a floating robotic orb, approached. Welcome to Galactic Grub Hub, it intoned. Tonight's special is fermented moon squid in starlight sauce. Can I start you with drinks? I'll have the house special, Jalindra said. And for you, Kyle? Water? He said. His stomach churned at the thought of alien alcohol. Jalindra's glowing orbs blinked. Was that a wink? Oh, come on. Live a little. Try the plasma fizz. It's delightful. The waiter buzzed off, leaving Kyle to fumble through small talk. So, what do you do? He asked, trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. Oh, I'm a cultural ambassador, Jalindra said brightly. I help my species understand other lifeforms. Like, did you know humans are the only species that blush? Fascinating. What's it like being so exposed? Exposed? He echoed, confused. You know, she said, gesturing vaguely. With skin. And bones. And internal organs? I can't imagine how you keep it all in place. Kyle laughed nervously. It's, not as hard as it looks. Their drinks arrived, and Kyle took a cautious sip of the plasma fizz. It tingled, like soda on steroids, and left a faint metallic aftertaste. Not bad, he admitted. Jalindra beamed, or at least, her glowing orbs brightened. See? You're more adventurous than you think. As they talked, Kyle found himself relaxing despite the absurdity of the situation. Jalindra was funny, smart, and surprisingly easy to talk to. If he ignored the fact that she occasionally absorbed stray crumbs into her gelatinous body, she was actually kind of charming. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Kyle sat at the table, trying not to look like he was completely out of his depth. Jalindra's enthusiasm was infectious, and her glowing orbs of light bobbed with every laugh. Still, the fact that she was literally jiggling as she spoke didn't help his nerves. He caught himself staring too long at one of her translucent tendrils and quickly looked away, hoping she hadn't noticed. You're so quiet, Jalindra teased, her voice bubbling with amusement. I thought humans were all about talking on dates. Don't tell me I've intimidated you already. No, Kyle stammered, managing a smile. It's just, you're a lot to take in. Her orbs blinked again in what he guessed was a pleased expression. I get that a lot. You humans and your rigid forms. Must be exhausting keeping everything in one place all the time. Kyle chuckled nervously, fiddling with the edge of his napkin. Yeah, it's a challenge. But, it works for us. Sure, she said, leaning, or rather oozing, closer. But don't you ever wish you could just let go? Be free to stretch out, take up as much space as you want? She extended a tendril, wrapping it gently around the salt shaker and absorbing it into her form. It floated inside her, suspended like a snow globe ornament. See? So much more efficient. Kyle watched, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. You just ate that? Jalindra burst into laughter, her body rippling like a disturbed pond. Oh no! It's not eating. It's more like borrowing. I can spit it back out later if you want. She wiggled, and the salt shaker popped out, landing on the table with a wet plop. See? Good as new. Kyle couldn't help laughing, though it was the kind of laugh that came from disbelief more than amusement. Yeah, okay. That's impressive. Their waiter floated back, this time carrying 2 plates. Well, plates was a loose term. One was a shimmering bowl of something that looked suspiciously alive, and the other was a steaming pile of what might have been pasta if pasta glowed faintly in the dark. For the gentleman, the waiter said, setting the glowing noodles in front of Kyle. And for the lady. It placed the bowl in front of Jalindra, who immediately absorbed it into her body, the contents vanishing like a drop of ink in water. Kyle hesitated. What's in this? Lunar noodles and nebula sauce, the waiter replied. A delicacy. Right, Kyle said, poking at the noodles with his fork. They wiggled back. He decided it was better not to ask questions and took a tentative bite. Surprisingly, it wasn't bad. Kind of spicy, with a hint of something that reminded him of citrus. Jalindra watched him expectantly. Well? Do you like it? It's different, he said diplomatically. But yeah, it's good. She beamed again. See? You're more adaptable than you'd give yourself credit for. They continued eating, or in Jalindra's case, absorbing, and talking. Despite the initial awkwardness, Kyle found himself genuinely enjoying her company. She was witty, curious, and had a knack for turning even the strangest moments into something funny. He started to forget about her unconventional appearance, and focused instead on how easy it was to talk to her. That is, until the next mishap. So tell me, Jalindra said, leaning in conspiratorially. What's the weirdest date you've ever been on? Kyle snorted. This one's definitely up there. She laughed, a sound like bubbles popping. Fair enough. But seriously, tell me. Okay, well, there was this one time. He launched into a story about a disastrous blind date where his date brought her pet snake and insisted it sit on the table the whole time. Jalindra listened intently, her orbs glowing brighter with every ridiculous detail. And then, he finished, the snake knocked over my drink, and she blamed me for not respecting its space. I didn't know how to respond to that. Jalindra was practically vibrating with laughter. Humans are so weird, she said. But I kind of love that about you. You're unpredictable. Kyle smiled, feeling a little more confident. What about you? Any crazy date stories? Oh, plenty, she said, waving a tendril. But one stands out. I once went out with a Maltaxian who thought it was romantic to gift me pieces of himself. Like literal chunks of his body. He kept saying, "This is how I show devotion," and I didn't have the heart to tell him I wasn't into organ donation. Kyle laughed so hard he nearly choked on his noodles. That's wow. Okay, I think you win. It's not a competition, she said, her voice full of mock indignation. But yes, I totally win. As the evening went on, the initial awkwardness between them dissolved into easy banter. Kyle even found himself flirting, though it was hard to tell if Jalindra noticed. At one point, she leaned in close, too close, and he couldn't help blurting out. You're really, shiny. She blinked her orbs at him, clearly amused. Thanks? I think it's a compliment, he insisted. You look radiant. Her body rippled, and Kyle realized she was blushing. Or at least, he thought she was. You're sweet, she said. For a rigid. Rigid? He repeated. That's what we call species with fixed forms, she explained. You know, bones, skin, that whole deal. We blobs think of you as kind of uptight. But you're different. Kyle wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult, but he decided to roll with it. Well, thanks. I think. By the time they finished their meal, Kyle was starting to feel genuinely comfortable around her. Sure, she was unlike anyone he'd ever met, literally, but there was something refreshing about her honesty and humor. As they waited for the check, he found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the disaster he'd expected. Of course, that's when the real chaos began. The table was cleared, and Kyle leaned back, feeling an odd sense of accomplishment. Dinner had gone surprisingly well, all things considered. He might have started the evening in a state of shock, but now he was genuinely enjoying Jalindra's company. Still, as the background hum of the restaurant shifted into something livelier, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to take a turn. Oh, this is my favorite part! Jalindra exclaimed, her orbs glowing with excitement. What part? Kyle asked, wary. The entertainment, she said, practically bouncing, if blobs could bounce. They always do something fun here. Kyle glanced around nervously. The lights dimmed, and a stage unfolded from the far end of the room. A booming voice announced, Ladies and gentlemen, rigid and non-rigid forms alike, it's time for the Galactic Karaoke Clash. Kyle froze. Karaoke? He barely survived dinner. He wasn't sure he had the energy for public humiliation. Maybe we can just watch? Jalindra's tendrils clapped together in what must have been applause. "Oh no, we have to participate! It's tradition!" Before Kyle could protest, Jalindra had already waved down a hovering tablet to sign them up. "What song do you want to sing?" she asked. I'm not much of a singer," he mumbled, trying to shrink into his chair. "Nonsense," she said, scrolling through the song list. "Humans are famous for their music. I've heard your species sing about everything from heartbreak to hamburgers." Kyle groaned. "Fine, but don't pick anything too embarrassing." She selected a song with a mischievous flick of her tendril, and Kyle barely had time to register the title before the announcer called their names. "Give it up for Jalindra and Kyle!" The stage lights blinded him as they stepped, or in Jalindra's case, squished, onto the platform. A large holographic screen displayed the song's title, Love Across the Galaxy. Kyle groaned internally. Of course, it was a duet. The music started, a cheesy mix of synths and dramatic beats. Jalindra took the first verse, her voice a strange but surprisingly pleasant melody that echoed through the room. The crowd cheered, clearly impressed. When it was Kyle's turn, he stumbled through the lyrics, his voice cracking on the high notes. Jalindra seemed unbothered, her tendrils swaying to the rhythm. By the chorus, Kyle had loosened up enough to join in fully, though he still felt ridiculous. The duet was meant to be romantic, but their mismatched styles turned it into an unintentionally comedic performance. Jalindra's alien harmonies contrasted hilariously with Kyle's off-key attempts to stay in tune. The crowd loved it. By the time the final note faded, the room erupted in applause. Kyle found himself laughing despite the absurdity of it all. Jalindra bowed, or rather rippled, graciously, clearly pleased with their performance. "That was something," Kyle said as they stepped off the stage. "You were amazing," Jalindra said, her orbs glowing brightly. "I knew you had it in you." "Yeah, well, thanks for pushing me out of my comfort zone," he said, half sarcastically. "I'm sure that'll go viral on the intergalactic web by tomorrow." Jalindra laughed. "Oh, definitely. You've got quite the following now." Before Kyle could respond, the announcer's voice boomed again. "And now, to settle the score, it's time for the fusion dance-off." Kyle blinked. "Fusion what?" Jalindra's tendrils quivered with excitement. "Oh, you're going to love this. It's a dance competition where couples merge their styles. It's the ultimate test of compatibility." "I don't dance," Kyle said flatly. "Don't worry," Jalindra said, dragging him toward the dance floor. "I'll lead." The music started, a pulsing beat that made the floor vibrate. Jalindra wasted no time, her gelatinous body moving in ways that defied physics. Kyle, on the other hand, shuffled awkwardly, trying to keep up without stepping in her puddle. "Relax," Jalindra said, extending a tendril to guide him. "Just feel the music." "I'm feeling like an idiot," Kyle muttered, but he let her lead anyway. The crowd watched with interest, some cheering, others laughing at his obvious discomfort. Despite his initial resistance, Kyle found himself getting into it. He matched her movements as best he could, and soon their mismatched styles started to blend into something oddly harmonious. That's when disaster struck. As Kyle spun, at Jalindra's insistence, he slipped on a stray puddle of her slime and tumbled straight into her. Before he could react, he was inside her. Literally. Her gelatinous body engulfed him like quicksand. The crowd gasped, and Kyle panicked, flailing uselessly as he floated in her translucent form. "Help!" he yelled, his voice muffled. Jalindra's orbs flickered in what looked like alarm. "Oh no! Hold still, I'll get you out!" Her tendrils swirled around him, and with a wet pop, Kyle was ejected onto the dance floor, covered in slime. The room erupted in laughter and applause, clearly entertained by the spectacle. Kyle groaned, wiping the goo from his face as Jalindra hovered over him, apologetic. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I got carried away." Kyle couldn't help laughing despite himself. "Well, that's one way to make an impression." Jalindra extended a tendril to help him up, and Kyle took it, his smile genuine. "You're a terrible dancer," he teased. "And you're not much better." she shot back, her voice bubbling with amusement. As they returned to their table, Kyle felt an unexpected sense of accomplishment. Sure, he'd made a fool of himself, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, he was actually having fun. And maybe, just maybe, this bizarre blob was the reason why. The crowd had dispersed, leaving the restaurant buzzing with soft chatter as Kyle and Jalindra returned to their table. He still felt slightly sticky from the earlier mishap, but by this point, he was too tired to care. Jalindra, for her part, seemed more vibrant than ever, her glowing orbs practically radiating with excitement. "That was incredible," she said, her voice bubbling with genuine enthusiasm. "You're so much fun, Kyle. I didn't expect you to dive into everything so wholeheartedly." Kyle chuckled, running a hand through his hair, which was still damp from her slime. "Well, it's not like I had much of a choice. You're kind of hard to say no to." Her orbs dimmed slightly, a sign he was starting to recognize as shyness. "You mean that?" "Yeah," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I mean, this isn't exactly what I pictured when I signed up for Astromatch, but it's been a lot better than I expected." "Better?" she repeated, almost uncertainly. "Yeah," he said with a grin. "You're not what I'm used to, but I think that's a good thing." She rippled slightly, as if flattered. "You're not what I'm used to either. Most of the time, people don't really give me a chance once they see the real me. They get scared or grossed out." Kyle shrugged. "Well, to be fair, you did swallow me on the dance floor." She laughed, a sound like bubbling champagne. "Okay, that's fair. But you survived, didn't you?" "Barely," he joked. "Though I think I might still have some of you in my ear." Jalindra reached out a tendril as if to check, but Kyle waved her off, laughing. It was strange. Only a few hours ago, he'd been convinced this was going to be the most awkward night of his life. Now he felt comfortable. Relaxed even. Jalindra had a way of making him forget all the reasons this shouldn't work. "So," she said, her tone turning more serious, "do you think we'll see each other again after this?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at her, at the way her form shimmered faintly in the dim light, and realized he didn't have a good answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "I mean, I'd like to. But this is all pretty new to me. I don't exactly have a lot of experience dating outside my species." She nodded, her orbs flickering thoughtfully. "I get it. It's a lot to take in. But for what it's worth, I think you're handling it pretty well." "Thanks," he said, smiling. "You're not so bad yourself." For a moment, they sat in silence, the comfortable kind that didn't need to be filled. Kyle found himself wondering what a second date with Jalindra would even look like. A walk through a zero-gravity park? A visit to an intergalactic art exhibit? He wasn't sure, but the idea didn't seem as crazy as it might have earlier. Their waiter returned with the check, and Jalindra reached out a tendril to stop Kyle from grabbing it. "My treat, remember?" "Are you sure?" he asked, hesitant. "Of course," she said. "It's tradition where I'm from. Whoever initiates the date pays." "Well, I'm not going to argue with tradition," he said, leaning back with a grin. She took care of the bill with a quick swipe of her tendril, and the waiter floated away, leaving them alone once more. "So," she said, her voice light but curious, "what happens now?" Kyle thought about it for a moment. "I guess I walk you home? Or roll you home? What's the protocol here?" She laughed. "Walking works. My place isn't far." As they left the restaurant, the cool night air of the space station washed over them. The streets were still lively, filled with aliens of all shapes and sizes going about their evening. Kyle couldn't help noticing how many of them gave Jalindra curious glances. Some seemed amused, others looked outright confused. He wondered how he must look walking next to her, a rigid human and a glowing blob. "Do you get stared at a lot?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Sometimes," she said with a shrug, or at least what he assumed was a shrug. "But I'm used to it. It comes with being a little unconventional." "Unconventional is one way to put it," he said with a smirk. "Are you embarrassed?" she asked, her voice teasing. Not really, he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. I mean, it's not every day I get to be the most interesting couple on the street. She rippled with laughter. You're funny. I like that about you. They reached her building, a tall, sleek structure that glowed faintly from within. Jalindra paused at the entrance, turning to face him. Well, this is me. Kyle hesitated, unsure of what to do. A handshake seemed too formal, but a hug, well, that seemed complicated, given her anatomy. Before he could decide, Jalindra extended a small, shimmering tendril and placed it gently in his hand. Here, she said. A parting gift. He stared at the tendril, confused. Thanks? It's a piece of me, she explained. Not literally, of course. It's more like a token of my affection. You can keep it or eat it if you're hungry later. Kyle blinked, unsure if she was joking. Eat it? Just kidding, she said, though her tone was so light he couldn't be sure. He smiled, tucking the glowing tendril into his pocket. Thanks. I'll, treasure it. Good, she said, her orbs flickering warmly. And hey, if you ever want to do this again, you know where to find me. Yeah, he said, grinning. I think I'd like that. As he turned to leave, Jalindra called after him. Oh, and Kyle? Yeah? He said, looking back. Next time, I'm picking the song. He laughed, shaking his head as he walked away. For the first time in a long time, he felt genuinely hopeful. Sure, the date hadn't gone the way he'd expected, but maybe that was the point. Sometimes, the best things in life came in the most unexpected packages. Even if that package was a giant, glowing blob.